Carly Adams. How you doing, Carly?
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
Good. I'm doing great. My
Good.
name is, by the way, last time you said I didn't even announce my name.
I know.
Robert Aldana. I'm a realtor here in the Scotts Valley area and specializing in the Scotts Valley area. And let's get down to business. We're going to talk about something that's really super exciting. How exciting is it?
Exciting and important.
Exactly. It's actually more important than it is exciting.
Yes.
Nevertheless, we're going to talk about, and that is closing costs. A lot of times when you're, not a lot of times, almost always when you're buying or selling a house, you're going to be, there's going to be some costs that are involved. And there are certainly quite a few costs involved in selling and buying a property. So it's important, Carly, we say this all the time, that you know and understand what your rights are and what you are responsible for. Because many times I have seen in the past where a buyer or a seller will pay for more fees than they are supposed to because they don't understand what the actual costs are.
Yeah,
of course,
or
it's
they
never
just
happened on
don't
one of
know,
my
right?
transactions, but
course
I'm
not.
just saying that I've seen it happen before. So let's do
Yeah.
a breakdown.
Yeah.
Let's talk about typical seller costs.
Yeah.
Okay, let's kind of break it down now so that you know. So if you're buying or selling a house, you definitely want to tune in here for the next 20, 30 minutes or so, however long it's going to take us. The first thing I want to talk about is if you are a seller, and it is true, first and foremost, if you are a seller, most of the time you're going to get most of the returns back because you're going to get the money that you're going to get when you sell your house. Right. But at the same time, you are going to have some costs that are typically more substantial than a home buyer cost and fees. So let's talk about title and escrow fees. We know, Carly, that the title and escrow fees are split 50-50, right? In the county of Santa Cruz.
Exactly. It's different per county, but Santa Cruz County, it's typically split 50-50 between buyers and sellers.
Yeah. Thanks for mentioning that because it's true. Like in Santa Clara County, the sellers pay all of the title and escrow fees. In Santa Cruz County, it's split 50-50, buyer and seller split it right in half. Yeah. So there's title and escrow fees, and there's also the title insurance. A lot of people don't know what is title insurance.
Yeah.
How important is title insurance?
Well, it's super important so someone can't come and claim that they're the owner of your home, right? It secures that you are who you say you are and you are the owner, and it's legal documents. It's legal record.
Absolutely.
So
Not only that. Yeah.
So important.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, in many cases also, there could be a situation where there's liens and encumbrances. If you are a home buyer and you're buying a house, and I'm going to tell you something, if you are buying a house and you are getting a mortgage on that property, the lender is going to require that you get title insurance because it's that important. If you're paying cash for a property, you do not have to get title insurance, but I'm going to tell you why you should get title insurance.
Very smart.
Title insurance doesn't just cover the transaction at the time, but it also goes back and makes sure that there are no other liens and encumbrances issued against the property. So while you may know Mr. and Mrs. Seller, they could be your friend, your a relative, etc., and they're saying we don't need to pay title and escrow fees. Let's save that. You could be in a situation where there's a mechanic's lien, other liens, other encumbrances, lawsuits against the property that you did not know existed. Right. And if you buy this property cash and you don't have title insurance, Carly, you could be in a heck of a lot of trouble in terms of having to pay some of those loans or liens off that you did not know about and that the seller did not disclose.
Exactly.
Right?
It's just protection, right? It's protecting your property that you're purchasing as a buyer, and as a seller, it's protecting what you're selling, right?
Yeah.
That you are who you say you are.
Absolutely.
So it's super important, and like you said, it's required for most transactions.
Yeah, it's required if you're getting a loan.
Yeah.
If you're paying cash, you don't have to do it, but you definitely
Still
should have.
recommended, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's actually, if you're paying cash, it's going to be a little bit less because there's a lender's title insurance policy versus, just a regular title insurance policy. So you'll pay a little bit less, but split 50-50. Mobile, notarying, and signings fees, those are typically paid by the party that's having them done. For example, if you are a home buyer and you're getting your loan documents done, et cetera, and somebody's driving out to you, you live in San Francisco or wherever it is that you live, or you're happy to be in Texas for the week, and you have to sign your loan documents, well, the title company is going to send a signer to you, and you have to pay. Exactly, you have to pay for a mobile notary.
Yeah.
Same thing with the seller. Carly, we work with sellers that are out of the area.
Right.
And if they're out of the area, they can't come to Scotts Valley or Santa Cruz County.
Yeah.
Right? Now, here's the one that sellers really, really love paying. I mean, they are super ecstatic about paying this one. You know what that one is, right? Which one is it?
Our commission.
Yeah, exactly. The brokerage fee. So the brokerage fee, the sellers typically, and in Santa Cruz County, and in pretty much every area that I know, the home seller pays a brokerage fee.
Yeah.
And here's what I want everybody to know. And people seem to think that there's a standard fee that people need to pay in brokerage fees or commissions. That is not true.
Right.
The actual brokerage fee is negotiable
Yep.
between the sellers and the buyers, and it's not set by law.
Right.
It's whatever the buyers and sellers agree to. It doesn't mean that a real estate agency can say, I'm not going to list it for any less than this, and they don't want to list it. You can't hold them to list a property for less than what they will agree to do so.
Yeah.
But there's no set in stone commission and brokerage fee that exists. It is always negotiable between the seller and the broker. Okay.
Yep. And I think it's important, like you said, the seller is the one that pays the brokerage fee, which means commission on both sides, right? So the commission for the buyer's agent and the seller's agent typically comes from the seller,
I'm
right?
glad you brought that up. You're so right. I forgot about that. Yeah. The buyer's brokerage fee, let's say, for example, you pay a 5% brokerage fee. Okay. If you pay a 5% brokerage fee, 2.5% will typically go to the buyer's agent.
Right.
And 2.5% will go to the seller's agent.
Yeah.
Now, because you pay a 5% brokerage fee or whatever fee that you pay, I'm just using 5% as an example.
That's the standard.
It's kind of what
the
people
new
typically
standard,
typically will pay, but there's no actual standard. But
Right.
I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
Let's say it's 5%. Just an example, everybody agrees to 5%. You need to make sure that your agent, if you're a listing agent, if you're the seller and you have an agent representing you, that they represent on the contract how much they are paying the seller's agent.
Yeah.
So let's say it's 5%. Again, this is just an example. Let's say it's 5%. The contract needs to say a certain amount that is going to the buyer's agent. So if it's 5%, that agent should be paying 2.5% to the buying agent. And the reason why I say that is, and this is really important, because there's a lot of agents who will say, well, I'll do it for 5%, but I'm going to keep 3% and I'm only going to pay out 2%.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you something, whether you think it's right or not right, there are agents who will say, I'm not going to show that property if they're only paying 2%.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that they should or shouldn't. I'm just saying the reality, and you know that, Carly. So make sure that when you have a listing agreement and you sign that listing agreement, that part of that listing agreement specifically states how much of the brokerage fee that you are paying in total is going towards the buyer's agent.
Yeah, the
Super
commission
important.
split. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Good point.
Okay. City transfer tax, if applicable. Some cities have transfer tax fees, and it's typically $3.30 per thousand. That's what the fees are. Based off the sales price. Yeah. So in Scotts Valley, we don't have city transfer tax.
Right.
Other areas, there are a few cities here in Santa Cruz County that do have city transfer tax. There are cities in San Jose, Santa Clara County that do have city transfer tax, but Scotts Valley does not have them.
Is it primarily for the bigger cities?
It just depends. Every city, it just whatever they have adopted. But that's a great question. It's just one of those things where it's whatever that particular city adopted at the time. So if there is a city transfer tax, typically split 50-50.
Yep.
The county transfer tax is typically $1.10 per thousand. It's that same way here in Santa Cruz County as it is in Santa Clara County. It's $1.10 per thousand, and typically a seller will pay that cost. Okay, just so you know, just a little heads up. As you know, a lot of these properties, Carly, have homeowners associations, et cetera. So you want to talk about what typically a seller pays for when it comes to HOAs.
You know, it varies. It depends. Some HOAs could be, $100 and something a month. Yeah. Others could be up to, $3,000 or $4,000 a month. And so it ends up being costly depending on what the HOA covers. If it's the exterior, the landscaping, the common areas. So HOA is different depending.
Every
but
single HOA.
It's a couple $100 a month, I would say.
I would say $200 to $400 is the average depending on what people pay for their homeowner association. But when you go to sell your house, you have homeowner association docs that you got to pay.
Right.
So if you're a seller, you have to provide to the buyers the homeowner docs, homeowner association docs, lets them know, all the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the guidelines, the rules, et cetera, whether you can or can't park two cars, whether you can have a big dog or a small dog, no dogs, et cetera.
Yeah, all the specifics of everything that it covers.
Exactly. That's why
Which is
some
good
people
to
don't like
know.
HOAs, right? Because they're sometimes
it
can be
restrictive sometimes.
Exactly.
Yeah. But sometimes it's a benefit because then, let's say you're busy, you don't want to deal with landscaping, you don't have to do that in the front, common areas. So sometimes it's a benefit, but it is an extra charge that you need to obviously factor in.
For sure. And here's another thing too, Carly, is that, those costs can be $300, $500, up to $1,000 or more to do a homeowner doc prep fee.
Yeah.
Right. It can cost that much.
And it's just a one-time fee, correct?
It's a one-time fee. Yep. Plus there's also a homeowner association transfer fee. And those are typically paid by the sellers. Okay. And a lot of times people want the budgets and the bylaws, et cetera. Those are costs that are typically paid by the sellers. Yeah. So the sellers will provide those to the buyers. And you know what? It's not just the buyers that want those documents. It's also the buyers' lenders.
Right.
A lot of times the lenders want to make sure that the property association is solvent, that they have money to continue to run the association, that they're not, in a lawsuit, because sometimes those things happen, right? Yeah. Homeowner associations can be involved in a lawsuit. And if they're involved in a lawsuit, it could wreak havoc on the whole situation.
Well, it affects the transaction too.
Completely. Yeah. But it could wreak havoc on whether a lender is wanting to pay or let somebody borrow money on a property that has a homeowner association with a lawsuit or litigation.
Yeah.
Many times lenders will lend on a homeowner association that has a lawsuit, as long as it makes sense. It's like, right. Hey, this flooded here, we're getting it fixed. We're close to coming to the end of the settlement and everything looks good. As long as things all make sense and everybody's solvent, those things can happen. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And sometimes, Robert, there's a buy-in, right? For certain properties, like certain mobile home parks, there's an actual buy-in, like a deposit almost that they have to, that would factor, I would imagine, into the lender fees and being able to make sure they can afford it, right?
Yep, exactly. Yeah. So the homeowner association doc prep fees, et cetera, providing those doc preparation or documents, I'm getting myself all confused here. Those are all typically and generally a cost associated with a seller. Your homeowner association is typically prorated. We'll talk about prorations in a couple of minutes. Your homeowner association that you continue to pay, you will continue to pay it up until the day that you close escrow. Right. Again, we'll talk about that in a minute in terms of prorations. The next cost that is associated typically with a home seller is the natural hazard disclosure. Yeah. A lot of times people will see this in the contract and they'll say, oh my gosh, I have to provide a geological disclosure. How much is that going to cost me? Yeah. That's got to be like thousands of dollars.
Lucky
like
for you.
$99 to like $130.
And the title company takes care of the ordering.
Absolutely.
And, it's all part of the process. Right?
Absolutely. So just so you know, the natural hazard disclosures is something you need to provide to the buyers. You will typically pay for it. And I will say typically, we'll talk about that in a minute. Typically, you will pay for it, but it's not a very expensive disclosure that you will be paying for. That's the good thing, right?
Yeah, right.
Home inspections. How important is it to have inspections done up front?
Oh my gosh. For the seller and the buyer's sake, I would say one of the most important things when getting ready to list your house is making sure you have the information about what the house has to offer, right? If there's any big faults or flaws or big undertakings that a buyer would have to take on. Yeah. Plus, I feel like it makes the seller look a little more honest, right? Because they're providing all the information that they know of that's available for their home. So I think it's super important.
Agreed. Yeah. Agree 100%.
Yeah. We do it, I think, on all of our 100% of our transactions.
Back in the day, Carly, many, many years ago when I first started selling real estate, it wasn't that way. Yeah. So what it was is like a buyer would enter into a contract and they would make an offer on a property and they would basically say, I want to buy your home. And let's shake hands and we'll figure out the details later, right? And then they bought a house for $100,000 and there's $5,000 worth of repairs. As soon as the inspections came back, they're like, well, I was going to pay you $100,000, but I'm going to pay you $95,000 because, well, a home inspection, a property inspection, a termite inspection, a roof inspection, if needed, pool inspections, etc. Those to me are super important and super crucial. Why? Because any home buyer that wants to buy a house, Carly, wants to go into, they're already spending an incredible amount of money nowadays to buy a house. They want to know the full condition of the property, right? If you're a home buyer and you're looking to buy a property, you want to know the full condition of the house before you make an offer. So in the days of back in the day, 25, 30, 35 years ago or longer, when buyers were ordering inspections after the fact, that was a recipe for disaster. Yeah. In fact, I would venture to say that there are less transactions falling through today because of upfront inspections, because buyers have their eyes wide open when they're walking into a property because they've seen the inspections that have been done. Yeah. Now, having said that, if you're a home seller and you order the inspections up front, typically and generally you will pay for them. Buyers will not typically pay for inspections that you ordered. If the buyers want to order their own inspections, and we'll get to that part in a minute, if the buyers want to order their own inspections, then the buyers would order those inspections.
That's their right, but they pay for them. Then
Absolutely. Absolutely. So any upfront inspections that you order are due and payable usually by the seller. And the inspections are typically, because a lot of these other costs that we're talking about are actually costs that you pay out of the sale of your property. So whatever your proceeds are, they deduct them.
Right.
There are a few things that you can't do that. The homeowner association docs, the HOA companies typically want their money like right now before they do anything, right?
Yeah.
And same thing with inspections. Inspectors want, if you do any inspections up front, the inspectors want their money up front, and I don't blame them. You know,
what if something happens and escrow doesn't close, right? And then they don't get paid, or
exactly.
They don't want to work for free, right?
100%. So, nobody wants to work for free. You want to work for free?
I mean, depends.
All right. So existing lender fees. Okay. Well, we talked about inspections. So if you order inspections, just remember, if you order inspections, you should be ordering pre-inspections. If you order them, you should be paying for them, and you will pay them up front. Those aren't typically fees that you will pay in escrow. Existing lender fees. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, typically $1,500 would normally cover a home inspection, a pest inspection, a pool inspection. Yeah. So it's minimal in the grand scheme of things when it comes to just having that peace of mind, right?
I think you nailed it.
It's a minimal price.
Because if you're looking at, $1,200 to $1,500 worth of inspections, you could be saving yourself, $12,000 to $15,000 worth of, sales price, because you have a buyer that's fully informed.
Right.
And I will say this too, in a competitive market, even though this market today, as we're recording, this is February 1st or 2nd. I don't know what day it is.
First
or
2nd?
First,
yeah.
February 1st. As we're recording, it's February 1st. The market seems to me like it's on a tiny little bit of an uptick.
It is,
right?
definitely, yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And so if you see buyers coming in competing, or if you see more than a couple, 3 buyers looking at a property, they all want to take a look at the inspections. In fact, we know that because every single one of our listings have the inspections up front. And when we see people that are looking at our inspections and our disclosures,
before even seeing the house,
you have a very smart and savvy buyer, and that's what you want.
And then it also shortens the time frame of inspection, contingencies, escrow, right? It kind of shortens everything up because they don't need the full 17 days now to get their own inspections. They have it all up front, so they can be extra prepared. So
you know what? You're hitting some great points, and I didn't think about that, but you're 100% on the money, because when inspections are already existing, if they want another 5 or 7 days to do anything else, they could do that, or 10 days, whatever the case is.
Yeah.
But if inspections are already there, typically and generally, the time frames for the contingency removals are shortened, which benefits the home seller.
Yeah.
Right? So that's a good point. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah. Existing lender fees, we're going to get to that. And so whatever you owe your mortgage company, if you have your loan on the property, of course, you're going to have to pay that, right? You're going to have to pay the existing lender fees. A lot of times they have demand fees. It's a fee that they have. I mean, the lenders typically have demand fees, reconveyance fees, late fees. They even have fees, which are fees for charging fees. Okay, I'm exaggerating a little bit. But typically and generally, lenders will have demand fees. So like if you want to know what you owe on your property, the title company will send a request for a demand, which says how much do these people actually owe. The lender will actually many times charge the title company just to tell them how much they owe. I'm sorry, has nothing to do with me, has nothing to do with the title company. Many times lenders will have a fax fee, a fee that they charge because they have to fax the demand over. I know it sounds crazy.
People still use fax machines?
They still kind of do. But when I talk about a fax fee, we're talking about a $25, $30, $50 fee. But still, it all adds up. It all adds up.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, when you have a mortgage on your property, there are going to be some fees that you're going to be responsible for paying. We talked about the demand fee. There's a recon fee, reconveyance fee, which basically it's a recorded document that basically states that you've paid off that mortgage and there's no more loans owed on that. If you're a home buyer, you definitely want that the deed. You definitely want it reconveyed so that you know that there are no liens on the property other than any mortgage that you may be getting to buy that property. So there's demand fees, reconveyance fees, interest. Let's talk about how interest works. A lot of people don't understand this, right? Yeah. A lot of times people will say, well, we're closing February 26th. My next payment is due March 1st. And so a seller will say, I only owe 4 days of interest. So
I see.
you actually don't owe 4 days of interest. Whenever you have a mortgage, you are paying mortgage in interest in arrears. So your payment in February is for all of January.
Right.
Let's say, for example, you say, well, it closes on the 4th of February. So I'm not going to make my mortgage payment, and I'm just going to let the lender take those 4 days of interest that I didn't pay. Well, they will take those 4 days of interest that you didn't pay,
as well as
plus the previous month's interest. So they're going to get their payment whatsoever.
Yeah.
And here's another thing too. Typically and generally, the lender will get their money the next day after it records. So you may think, we close on February 4th. I'm only paying you interest until February 4th. Well, the lender will count until they actually get their money. Mm-hmm. So if you close on a Friday and it closes late on Friday, chances are the lender's going to get their money Monday.
Right.
So you're going to pay all the way up till Friday. You're also going to pay Saturday, Sunday, and Monday's worth of interest. Just so you know, it's not a big deal, but it kind of is. But it's important that you understand how that works. Does that make sense?
It all adds up, and it's all these things you expect to get a certain amount, and all of a sudden the amount you get is a lot less. You know, it kind of sidewinds you, right?
Yep, for sure. For sure.
So it's good to have upfront knowledge about
what
to expect.
Yeah. It really does, Carly, because when home sellers take a look at these things, they look at them and they get overwhelmed.
Yeah.
They're like, oh my gosh, look at all these costs that are associated with me selling my house.
Yeah.
And so then you throw an extra $50 here, an extra $60 there, an extra $125 there. You may not think it's a big deal, but in the grand scope of things, it may not be, but it could be overwhelming because you could be feed to death. And you're like, oh my gosh, I'm selling my house. I'm paying all these fees.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, these are fees that a lot of these lenders will tag on when you have a mortgage with them. And you pretty much many times know up front when you're signing off for that mortgage in the beginning.
Yeah.
And later down the road, you'll pretty much know what it is. Yeah. Now, loan balance, of course, we talked about the loan balance. You'll have to pay whatever your loan balance is, everything that you owe on the property. And it can't be a loan balance. Like a lot of times I've heard sellers say, I don't want to pay a demand fee. I don't want to pay $100 for the lender to tell me. I already know what it's worth. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, you still have to have
the title
exact
company
number.
has to have a demand from the actual lender that's telling them exactly how much is owed.
Because there might be fees that you're not sure about that you didn't know about that the lender knows about, right? Like you said. So having them send that info is key.
You know what's interesting is a lot of times a home seller, and I've been doing this for a long time, and I could tell you that in all the years that I have been selling real estate, I have never been able to tell a seller right down to the penny how much they're going to get.
Well, it's impossible.
I will give them an estimate because of interest, because a little bit of a fee that was here, prorated taxes, etc.
Yeah.
Let's talk about prorations. Yep. Thank you for bringing that up.
Segue.
Taxes is a great segue, right? There's a reason why you're doing this show here.
Well, it's on the list. So.
Oh, it is? Oh, okay, got it.
Next
Okay.
on the list. So.
I was going to give you all this credit, but I guess I don't need to. Should I take that credit back?
No, I magically came up with that on my own. The next
prorations.
Yes.
Okay.
Very important.
We talked about interest prorations. Same thing with property taxes. A lot of times you pay property taxes, right, up front, and you've already paid them. Just so you know, you will get up until the date that it closes escrow billed for that amount. And then when it closes escrow, any amount that you paid overage on the day that you close, you should get that amount back to you.
Yeah.
Same thing applies with homeowner association fees, right? So let's say you have a $400 homeowner association fee and you paid it on the first because you're one of those people that always pays your bills on the first and you closed escrow on the 4th and you're thinking to myself, I already paid in advance a whole month of HOA fees. That's not fair. Well, don't worry because typically and generally the title company will look at the day that it closes and they will give a proration. So you will only pay for those 4 days that you use and then the buyers will give you a credit. You will see that.
And they send you a check, correct?
Yeah.
The title company? It doesn't come out of your profit, right?
Yeah. Well, the title company will typically can give you a check, like a cashier's check.
Yeah.
I always think that the smart thing to do is to get it wired to your account.
Yeah.
It's just, it's cleaner, et cetera.
And then it's in there.
Yeah. And here's what I'll tell home sellers. Don't email your title company with your banking information.
Yeah,
don't
100%.
do that. Call them or talk to them or see them directly before you give them your banking information, because, wire fraud does exist. It's very dangerous. And you know what? It is prevalent and it's very sad.
Yeah.
I've heard about situations where homeowners will lose all of their savings and there's no way to recoup it. So if you are selling your house and you're going to be getting proceeds, which hopefully you are, talk directly to the title company.
Yeah, just call them.
Tell them exactly where the money needs to go.
Even if you just need to double check. If you see an email that you're not sure about, just call and make sure that it's legit, For sure.
Yeah. And don't email your banking information ever.
Yeah.
These scumbags stay behind computers and they fish and they look for these type of emails from title companies. So don't fall victim to these people who are out to defraud you.
Harm you.
Yep, absolutely. So prorations, we explained proration. So
and to go back to taxes, prorated, you only pay taxes twice a year,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So that's why the proration occurs, because you're either not current or you're too current, right? So they have to make it right depending on that close date. So.
And then sometimes you will see as a debit, if you are supposed to be paying taxes and your taxes are due or they're overdue, sometimes you'll see the payment being deducted from your proceeds, and then it'll be prorated again to the buyer. So just know that almost always, unless you have a title company that's just not working the numbers right, almost always you're going to get prorated up until the date that it closes escrow properly. And here's what I would say too. Read through each and every item on your title and escrow fee sheet, on your net sheet. Make sure that everything is accurate as it should be. Make sure that all the monies are supposed to go to the people accurately on that net sheet. Okay, make sure you do that. Okay, because when you go sign, you're giving authorization for them to distribute the monies according to whatever that net sheet says. Make sure that you do that.
You probably like to review that with your clients like I do. So we catch stuff if they don't know what to look for. We can catch that as well. And it's so good to just review that, because when you're messing with people's money, you don't want to miss a single penny, right?
100%. 100%. Now let's talk about buyer costs, typical buyer costs. Okay, that's the next. So we talked about seller costs. Now we're going to talk about home buyers costs. Now, before I get into home buyers costs, because this kind of applies to both buyer and sellers, there are some situations where a buyer will request that you pay for some of their closing costs.
Right.
So if they say, hey, I want you to pay $10,000 worth of my closing costs so I can lower my interest rate, or I want you to give me $10,000 credit because, I'm going to need to do some repairs to the deck or the roof, etc. And those are typically given as a credit for the home buyer's closing costs. Just so you know, if you are given a credit of closing costs, whatever amount that is, that should always be accurately reflecting on the seller net sheet. So make sure whatever the contract says. This is why I think your real estate agent, like me, I always go through every single item on the on the net sheet. It's important. I want to make sure
it's missed, right? Like a credit, right? That's very important to a buyer. That credit could be the difference between covering closing costs or not.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. So buyer's costs, prorations for both buyers and sellers. We talked about prorations. Typical buyer's costs are title and escrow fees are split 50-50, just like the title company is in Santa Cruz County. If you live in Santa Clara County, or not even if you're buying in Santa Clara County, then the title and escrow fees, title insurance costs, etc., those are typically absorbed by the home sellers. But in Santa Cruz County, Scotts Valley, the whole area here, that's typically split 50-50. The other costs that you're going to be paying for, if you're going to get an appraisal, which means if you're getting a mortgage, you're going to need an appraisal. Typically, you'll be paying for that appraisal. There are certain situations where a lender will give you a credit, they will pay for your appraisal cost if you get along with them. So it just depends. Those are things you want to talk to your lender about.
Typically, buyer cost, they pay that as part of their lender costs, right?
Absolutely. And they pay those up front, typically.
Yeah.
Okay, that's something that people need to know about. These aren't costs. The first one we just talked about, the appraisal fee, the credit report fee, those are typically paid up front, because if for some reason the transaction doesn't go through, that appraiser still needs to be paid.
Right.
That pulling of your credit report still needs to be paid.
Right.
Okay, so we talked about the title and escrow fees being split 50-50. Any inspections that the buyers order are also the responsibility of the buyers typically and generally. So if a buyer comes to you, and even though you've had inspections done up front, which I think are extremely wise and crucial for you to do, even if you've had them done up front, there's no law that says that the buyers don't have the right to order their own inspections. A lot of times buyers say, I want to order my own inspections. I love what you've done here, but I still want to get my guy to come out here to make sure that what you're telling me is accurate.
Too.
Nothing wrong with that. But if you do that, you're paying for those inspections, right?
And sometimes I've worked with buyers before where there was no home inspections, from the seller side, where there was no home inspections provided for us. So we wanted to, of course, make sure we had inspections done, and we paid for them as the buyer side, but you could potentially have the seller pay for them, I would imagine, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So it just depends,
if there's none available.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
And then points also. So a lot of times a point, just so in case you don't know what a point is, for those of you who are watching, you know what it is.
Yep.
A point is prepaid interest. So many times, let's say, for example, yeah, exactly. So let's say each point is a percent of the loan amount. So let's say you have a $650,000 loan, right? If you're paying 1 point, you're paying $6,500 in addition to, your other costs to get a certain interest rate. Let's say rates are, and I'm just going to use this as an example. Let's say rates are 6%, right? And 6% are based on 0 points. That means that everyone's breaking even. Breaking even means that the lender is going to give you a 6% interest rate at 0 points. But you say, I don't want 6%. I want 5.75%. Well, sometimes, or many times, if not most of the time, you can buy that interest rate down.
Right,
so you could say, I'm going to pay a point, or I'm going to pay 2 points. Every point that you pay as prepaid interest lowers the actual interest rate.
Right.
So whatever those points are, if you're 2 points of a $650,000 loan amount, you're at a $13,000 cost.
Yeah.
Those are things that sometimes you can negotiate and have the sellers pay if the sellers are willing to do that, and if the dollars make sense and the price makes sense and the offer makes sense. Like if a seller, representing a home seller, if a buyer comes to me and says, you have a property listed at $1.4 million, and I'm willing to give you $1.4 million if you pay $20,000 in points. Well, that's like giving me $1,380,000. If it makes sense to me, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't make sense, then that's another story altogether. But
for
regardless,
a buyer, it makes their payment make sense, right?
Absolutely.
It makes it affordable. If their rates got down a little bit lower, then they could actually afford the payment now.
Absolutely.
So it's a benefit to the buyer for sure when trying to buy a home.
And in this market, I see more and more home buyers requesting that the sellers pay for their closing costs or pay for a portion of their closing costs.
So much higher.
Yeah, with rates being higher. And a lot of buyers are like, it's not even about me being greedy and wanting to get the best deal possible, but it's about me being able to afford that house.
Being able to do this,
And I can afford a house at 6%, but I can afford it at 5.5%.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes
so
a
those
difference.
are the things. Yeah, it makes all the difference in the world. So I get it. I totally get it.
Especially if you don't have a 20% down or something, then your payment's even higher.
Yeah,
so it's definitely a beneficial thing. You're right though. I haven't seen it, very common except for the last year or two. Really, people are starting to really kind of utilize that tool as a buyer. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we've broken it down. So the typical cost for the buyers, we've kind of broken that down. But at the end of the day, just so you know, there is no law that says here that the sellers have to pay for these things,
right?
Or that the buyers have to pay for these things. These things are customary. Mm-hmm. There is no law that says you automatically, positively have to pay for these things. No. There's no law that says that.
Yeah.
But these things are customary. Mm-hmm. If you're a home seller that says, hey, I'll tell you what, I want this price and I want you to pay for the brokerage fee and I want you to pay for all these other costs, you could be in a position where you're going to blow away a buyer.
Yeah.
And you have to think, there's a wise man that once told me, don't step over dollars to pick up dimes and nickels. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. In other words, a lot of times a home seller will say, well, I'm not going to pay for a home buyer's closing cost of $3,500. Yeah, but the buyer's paying you, full price.
Point, yeah.
It's like, why wouldn't you do it? At the end of the day, you got to do the math.
Thing too, for each parties have to pay certain fees to,
100%.
You're part of the transaction together. So
100%. So I hope this made sense. I hope this made sense to all. We just gave you a little rundown in just over 30 minutes of what the typical home seller and home buyer costs are. Just know that, again, everything is all negotiable, but this is a customary cost that we see on a daily basis. And if you have any questions, shoot me an email to robert@robertaldana.com, and I'm happy to try and answer that. I want to thank you, Carly, for hanging out with us here today. Great 30 minutes.
It's great talking about this stuff because a lot of buyers and sellers don't know this info. So it's really helpful ahead of time.
100%.
Yeah.
So thank you for your time, for all your knowledge. And I want to thank you all for watching this first edition of the Let's Talk Real Estate podcast. And for those of you who are listening, Thank you for listening. I want to wish you a wonderful week. Carly.
Thank you. Yeah, we're midweek here. So
midweek. So I'll see you soon, and I'll see you all soon. Again, any questions you have, send me an email to robert@robertaldana.com. If you want to chat with me directly, give me a call or text me 831-252-3959. Thanks again, Carly.
All right.
Thank you. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.